Colin's Last Stand merchandise has finally arrived. I've partnered with Declaration Clothing to bring you high-quality shirts, stickers, and even a poster, all proudly made right here in the United States. If you're interested in checking out my wares and supporting independent, ad-free political and historical content like CLS, please head on over to Declaration Clothing at declarationclothing.com. And yes, I know I look damn good. Now, on with the show. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Colin's Last Stand right here on YouTube. My name is Colin Moriarty. I hope today's video finds you and yours very well indeed. And yes, I'm finally back on camera after a couple of episodes off camera. Thank you for your patience on that front. Today's episode is actually a response to a fan vote over on Patreon at patreon.com/ColinsLastStand. Every month I do a two-part kind of election, a primary election and a general election for $2 and up per month subscribers, where they can choose a topic that I'll cover the next month. And this was actually the topic that was chosen in the September election, but October kind of got away from me. I wanted to do that Wolfenstein video before it got old, so this got pushed to November. I apologize about that. The good news is that the very next episode of this show will be October's winner, so they'll be back to back, so we'll take care of all of that. No worries there. But the election winner for September was, what would the founding fathers of the United States think of the 21st century and 21st century America? And I had to kind of ponder on that for a while and try to think of an angle, and I figured out the angle. And the angle was to go to the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers were 85 op-eds basically written in a few different newspapers in 1787 and 1788. They were written anonymously under the pen name Publius, and no one knew until much later who actually wrote them. And who wrote these anonymous kind of op-ed, article, essay type things? Well, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay wrote them. They were written in defense of the Constitution, and they're really awesome reads. You should take the time to read them. They're really fantastic. They are direct lineages to how the founders felt about the Constitution and what their intentions were. So they're immensely important documents in American history, and they tell us what we need to know, I think, to do this video. So I've pulled out a few excerpts from a few of the Federalist Papers to kind of glean what I think the founders would have thought of things going on today, much like you asked for in the vote. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let's go. Let's start with what James Madison had to say in Federalist number 39, which allows us to address the very way we discuss the United States and how it's structured. Madison wrote, quote, "The first question that offers itself is whether the general form and aspect of the government be strictly Republican. It is evident that no other form would be reconcilable with the genius of the people of America, with the fundamental principles of the Revolution, or with that honorable determination which animates every votary of freedom to rest all our political experiments on the capacity of mankind for self-government. If the plan of the convention, therefore, be found to depart from the Republican character, its advocates must abandon it as no longer defensible." End quote. Here, Madison is making a case for America's stature as a republic, a governmental structure pretty much unheard of around the world in the late 18th century, and how only this particular form of government would do for the people of the United States. Which is why he and his contemporaries may have a hard time understanding how many of today's Americans talk about our country and our government from a place of, frankly, ignorance. For starters, Madison may be confused why so many people, even learned people in power, continuously call the United States of America a democracy, which it isn't. Our country is predicated on some democratic ideals per se, but in reality, the US is a federal republic. The people don't make the decisions. The people vote for representatives that make the decisions on their behalf. Sometimes those decisions are unpopular. Other times, they don't ultimately reflect the will of the people that installed the representatives in power. Indeed, right or wrong, there are plenty of counter-democratic institutions, like the Electoral College, that sometimes blatantly don't reflect the will of the people in a democratic fashion. Direct democracy, as it were, happens at local and state levels regularly. Here in California, we vote on propositions in a directly democratic fashion. This was also the case for the 10 years I lived in San Francisco, a city which exercises direct democracy at the ballot box in ways most American cities don't. While Americans love democracy, and for good reason, Madison and his crew would be unlikely to understand the conflation of the terms democracy and small r republicanism. In fact, they'd be distressed at the high level of civic ignorance pervading much of our society, to the point that people can't even correctly describe the government they live under. In Federalist number 47, however, Madison gets deeper into our system of government, particularly in regard to the separation of powers, a key foundational element of the American Constitution the Federalist Papers were written in support of to begin with. He writes, quote, One of the principal objections inculcated by the more respectable adversaries to the Constitution is its supposed violation of the political maxim that the legislative, executive, and judiciary departments ought to be separate and distinct. In the structure of the federal government, no regard, it is said, seems to have been paid to this essential precaution in favor of liberty. The several departments of power are distributed and blended in such a manner as at once to destroy all symmetry and beauty of form, and to expose some of the essential parts of the edifice to the danger of being crushed by the disproportionate weight of other parts, end quote. In other words, there's fear of centralized power, and Madison's adversaries didn't think he was doing a very good job of separating everything and making them independent of each other. And they're afraid of centralized power because he and his contemporaries just dealt with it in the Revolution, albeit in admittedly hobbled parliamentary form, and saw evidence of totalitarianism's destructive power elsewhere in the world, and in their copious history books. But here, Madison and his founding peers would likely be more heartened than they would have been with the earlier discussion of the nature of our federal republic. Many Americans may not be able to call a federal republic, but they can at least in a basic way point at the separation of powers and checks and balances that help lubricate the many wheels of government, keeping any one branch, executive, legislative, or judicial, from seizing an inordinate amount of power. But this is a double-edged sword because the founding generation would also likely be distressed by the increasing imbalance of power between the executive and legislative branches, not to mention wide claims of an increasingly activist Supreme Court legislating from the bench, crossing the separation of power wires in the process. Terms like imperial presidency would confound them. So too would the insane number of executive orders issued by presidents of both parties in circumvention of Congress. They may be confused why Americans have a seething loathing for their own representatives, yet keep sending the same exact people back to the House and the Senate over and over again, year in and year out. More on that in a minute. They would almost certainly be frustrated by the complete lack of action out of the legislature, and as they were surrounded by some of the most esteemed, intelligent, and capable men in American history, they'd likely be aghast at who sits in the Oval Office, regardless of politics, especially when they learned how he got there in spite of what he said and did. Among all of the negativity, though, James Madison would also be able to glean some positivity out of our current state, especially when it comes to the pretty much completely uninterrupted nature of our republic, since they set it into motion in the 1780s. In Federalist number 37, he writes, quote, "Energy in government is essential to that security against external and internal danger, and to that prompt and salutary execution of the laws, which enter into the very definition of good government. Stability in government is essential to national character, and to the advantages annexed to it, as well as to that repose and confidence in the minds of the people, which are among the chief blessings of civil society," end quote. If anything, the American government has been a beacon of stability in the last 2.5 centuries of global history. Indeed, the United States is the oldest still-going constitutional system in the world. This would please Madison and his cohort, especially when they studied all that had happened in between the early 19th century and today. As an example, he may be distressed to learn of all the conflicts the United States has found itself in since his day, yet may also take heart that not even the most serious and existential battles America has fought interrupted its ability to self-govern, and to do so on a timeline. For instance, presidential elections and the peaceful transfer of power, both at the absolute heart of American republicanism, has gone completely uninterrupted, even when it may have been understandable for there to have been a lapse. In 1864, as the country tore itself apart in civil war, there was a presidential election. In 1932, in the wake of economic calamity and among a society reeling from loss, there was a presidential election. In 1944, as the United States fought a two-front world war against two devious and dangerous foes, there was a presidential election. The U.S. is the definition of governmental stability, wielding a focused energy that has kept it on track through 45 presidential administrations and counting. And I know it may not be a ubiquitously popular stance, but I'll take it anyway. The tenure of Donald Trump and the response of the independent bodies that surround his executive branch have readily stood up and shown that the American system bends for no man. If you think fascism is alive and well in the U.S. today, or that there are signs of it, well, with all due respect, you don't know what you're talking about. But not all is well, of course, as John Jay may notice in conjunction with Federalist number 2, in which he wrote, quote, "To all general purposes we have uniformly been one people, each individual citizen everywhere enjoying the same national rights, privileges, and protection. As a nation we have made peace and war. As a nation we have vanquished our common enemies. As a nation we have formed alliances and made treaties and entered into various compacts and conventions with foreign states." End quote. This all sounds well and good, and surrounded by those who fought in the American Revolution, everything Jay wrote was true, too. It was literally their experience even under the original American Constitution known as the Articles of Confederation. But here's the thing. 2017 America is a far different place than, say, 1788. America is deeply divided today. People are at each other's throats. Some suggest that this is surface level and that you don't find these divides when you dig deep. I disagree, and so would Jay and his friends. The politics of today are severing our society in ways we've not seen since the middle of the 19th century. The fact is, America is strongest when it's united, not necessarily in lockstep on every issue, but certainly in a feeling of brotherhood and sisterhood, in camaraderie and with the understanding that people may approach situations, issues, and everything else from different perspectives and draw different conclusions. That polite disagreement is part of living in a place like the United States. Listen, politics have always been heated ever since American political parties were founded against many of the framers' wishes. It's always been personal, and it's always been divisive to some degree. But the complete breakdown of normalcy we're witnessing today, the destruction of comedy, and I don't mean comedy C-O-M-E-D-Y, but C-O-M-I-T-Y, the utter obliteration of decency, and has taken the traditional edge of American politics and molecularly sharpened it. To unite 13 disparate colonies was difficult, but it was done because of shared experiences and a shared heritage. Keeping our fragile republic of 50 entities together in today's climate seems to be a heavier lift, and it wouldn't be surprising if Jay and his friends were confounded by how we're managing to carry on at all under such a tumultuous climate. Alexander Hamilton gets to the heart of the matter in Publius's very first missive, however. In Federalist number 1, he writes, quote, "Happy will it be if our choice should be directed by a judicious estimate of our true interests, unperplexed and unbiased by considerations not connected with the public good. Nothing could be more ill-judged than the intolerant spirit which has at times characterized political parties. For in politics, as in religion, it is equally absurd to aim at making proselytes by fire and sword. Heresies in either can rarely be cured by persecution." End quote. This is an incredibly powerful statement by Hamilton. Here, the founders may be more conflicted and outright angry than anywhere else. There's always been a level of self-importance and self-fulfillment in being part of the government. But the nature of American governance today suggests that most people who represent us and work on our behalf are in it strictly for themselves, from the executive branch to the legislature, and perhaps even to the Supreme Court in some cases. It's not a safe nor tenable position from which to govern a nation of 325 people, nonetheless 325 million. It's here that I think we have to look inward, specifically about our own apathy as a people, and precisely on the point that, well, we deserve better. When it comes to politics, many people have become bizarrely aggressive. They seem eager to alienate people that they might find broad consensus with, and they look to other those that don't march right alongside them when it comes to every conceivable political position, which is weird because I can't think of a single person in my own life or out there in the public that adheres 100% to my personal ideology. Can you? This is then reflected in the legislative and executive bodies at the local, state, and federal levels that supposedly represent us and our interests. Indeed, it may have started with all of them, seeped into our own lives, and then subsequently regurgitated itself across state capitals and Washington, D.C. Either way, we reap what we sow. The founders were men at odds with each other, yet they found consensus enough to defeat the 18th century's greatest military power, found a new republic, and endeavored to preserve it for posterity. Today's Congress can barely pass a bill. House members and senators are more interested in running for re-election or scoring a good soundbite on cable news, and we all lose because we keep sending the losers back. It's here that I think the founders would be scratching their heads and wondering most where and when we went wrong. And with this, we have no one to blame but ourselves by telling ourselves that there are no choices and that we can't do better. There are choices, and we can do better. We just refuse to make the right choices. Hamilton, Madison, and Jay would likely be convinced that we should chart a different and more constructive path in order to course correct what's gone wrong. I'd say they'd be right. Well, that's it for this episode of Colin's Last Stand. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your time and attention and your support, of course, over on Patreon, here on YouTube, listening to the new podcast on iTunes, and wherever you download podcasts and all of the rest. Remember to thumb up the video if you like it, thumb it down if you don't, share it with friends and family, leave a comment if you like, and I will see you next time for more Colin's Last Stand. Keep on learning.